Hello, and welcome to Nerd Variety, the podcast where we talk about nerd things and variety things, and today Star Wars things.
Yay!
A lot of Star Wars things. Today we are joined by a special guest, super special guest, Matthew. Right?
Hello.
Matthew Carlos! Where I point to him on my screen. But yeah, so he's here because he's the only other person I know that knows enough about Star Wars. These two, they're okay.
The Force is not as strong with us.
Yeah.
Now Star Trek, I'm your girl.
All right, but we're not talking about that today. So
I know, and you guys never will.
Sure, we will. It's just not important. Yeah. All right, so today we're gonna get started. We're going to just do a brief review of a couple things that happened since at the end of last year. So first of all, The Mandalorian came and finished its first season. And what did we all think?
I have seen all of the Baby Yoda memes, not because I've searched them out, just because they're everywhere. But I have not seen the show. I have not.
They're everywhere because they're wonderful. Josh, are you trying to count?
Okay, 10 out of 10. Yeah.
10 out of 10. Okay.
Yeah. It was awesome. Very great use of CG. Everything felt really well balanced between, practical and digital effects, and just a very Star Wars space western story that I've always wanted.
Yeah. So as someone who has not seen it, my biggest question to those of you who have is, how does it compare seeing Star Wars now as a TV show instead of movies? Because I know we had
we've had TV shows.
I know there was an animated one, but I don't feel like there were a lot of big name live action ones.
Yeah,
we've never had any
the first official.
This is the first live action one.
Yeah. They were planning to do a live action one for a while now, but it just never got off the ground.
Yeah, but what'd you say are the primary differences between the TV show format and the movie format?
It's a lot more slower paced. You have a lot of time to just kind of sit in the universe. It's not wham, bam, bam, bam action all the time. You get a little bit of that here and there, but then you also get a lot of story, and you get kind of a little slice of life in there as well. But it's not too much. It keeps you in the action.
Okay. Because to me it seems and don't get me wrong, I love the movies and I love how action packed they are, but I feel like slowing it down a little bit in order to make a TV show is kind of what it needs.
Yeah. And that's as someone who has not as much as possible, but as someone who has explored a lot of the extended universe a good bit, I have always kind of felt that this was a thing that needed to be made to really help get the general audiences more invested in it, and it's nice to know that other people are able to get that feeling of the universe to help get a better appreciation for Star Wars, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because to me, Star Wars has always been more than just the movies.
Yeah,
lifestyle. And
they had a great untapped resource with after Return of the Jedi. They kind of jumped to when they made the new trilogy. So there was 30 years of things happening in the galaxy. We don't really know what all happened, but Mandalorian, that's a good little cut we were able to get out of it, because most stories like that would take what most stories have been taking place between Revenge and A New Hope.
Yeah. Or between what's the Attack of the Clones and Revenge.
Yeah.
The Clone Wars, of course. Yeah. So obviously this is not this show obviously does not have the length yet of the Clone Wars, which is actually Matthew, has it finished its final season, or is it in its final season?
So the Clone Wars, it's finished officially with season 7. It's supposed to come out at the end of February. It's what originally was supposed to come out before Disney bought Star Wars and did away with the Clone Wars. So they finished these episodes, and they're supposed to come out towards the end of the month. And I think it's I'm not too sure how many episodes. I think it's like less than like 10 or 15, but they're like, 20-minute episodes, and they're supposed to tell the story leading right up into Revenge of the Sith. So it's kind of cool. You get to see other perspectives of what's going on during that movie, but you not actually tell the whole movie story again.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be interesting. I have the hardest time really getting through like the first season mostly of the Clone Wars, just because it's kind of slow. It's kind of slow moving. I know a lot about it. Yeah, I know a lot about it later on. Like I know all the Darth Maul stuff, a lot of that, and I'm excited to get to that. But it's so hard to actually.
It's like the first season of like Rebels, or like I haven't even seen Resistance because it doesn't really appeal to me, which is fine. It's Star Wars is for everybody, so like it's more for kids stuff. But like once you get through those first couple seasons, you really kind of get into like the meat and potatoes of Star Wars, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah. And, I only bring up Clone Wars because, well, first of all, it's ending. And this, The Mandalorian, to me kind of feels like the live action version of Clone Wars, but in the new trilogy, like in that, closer to that timeline, if you kind of get what I mean. Like it's telling the story of like soldiers or bounty hunters, that don't really get the spotlight usually in the movies. And I like that kind of thing. Again, it's really getting to explore the universe and what it's all about, like what the average person in the universe is doing. Or maybe not so
like
average. But.
A lot of people think like with Star Wars, it's all about like the Jedi and like the Sith, and it's like always the good and the bad. But like a lot of the people, like the galaxy's so big in that universe that like some people have never even heard of the Jedi, and it's kind of cool for like within like the stories for them to say, okay, there's not only just the Jedi and the Sith. It's not only just like the light side and the dark side. Like there's different cultures that like have their own versions of what the Force is, and it's really cool to see. Like even though it's the same thing, it's just different applications of how they see it.
Yeah, and we're also I'm gonna get back into that near the end of our discussion when we talk about video games.
All right.
So after talking about the trilogy, the sequel trilogy as well, which also just wrapped up in December, we finished out the Skywalker saga, what it has been dubbed. And, we're just going to talk about that a little bit while we're doing reviews. What did everybody think about The Rise of Skywalker?
It was good.
Yeah.
It was good. I have to say, like, there's a lot of heart in there, a lot of, good tribute to Star Wars as a whole. But it did show that it was a bit disjointed from other movies in the trilogy, and they kind of it felt a little thin at certain parts, especially how the plot moved along. But I had a lot of fun, especially after rewatching all of them and just being like, okay, this is the end of the saga, and I guess it was a fun ending.
Yeah, I definitely would put it in. There's like this special category of movies I have where I'm like, they're not masterpieces, but they're just really fun to watch, right? And you get into them, and the story's engaging, and the characters are fun, and I really feel like it fell into that category. Like there were some really, really good moments, but I feel like in general, like it was just a good time. You had lightsaber battles and things and spaceships, and like it was just everything that you wanted from Star Wars in that aspect.
So it wasn't everything I wanted.
Well, in terms of like,
it was everything I expected. Let me say that.
In terms of like,
you
all of the classic Star Wars things, I felt like were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, like for me, I want more from it because, like, it's supposed to be the end of like 40 years of storytelling, but it's like, there's so much pressure to like deliver on it that like I don't think anybody would be truly happy with what they got. Like. For me, like, I don't like the Palpatine thing. I don't like how it gets explained in like the first 5 minutes. It's like somehow he's returned. Like, I'm like, like it's
that was weird.
It's not great, cool, but like I guess with the sequel trilogy, it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it had like a concrete plan.
Yeah,
and it's just that's where I think it suffers from the most.
Yeah, and you can really
Mhm.
feel it. It's
Yeah.
that really bleeds through to the audience, I think.
Yeah.
Just and I was a big fan of The Last Jedi. I know that one was also a very divisive film. I really liked what they were doing with it, because to me, I liked it because it really did kind of give that feeling of that a lot of the extended universe gets, or the feeling that gives off of that. It's not just about the Jedi and the legacy and everything. It's also about everybody else as well, the whole universe. And I feel like that movie did a good job of that. But then, of course, J.J. Abrams was just like, no, it's about the Jedi. It's about Jedi and legacy and all that stuff. So it was.
I guess it was hard
I knew that it was going to be like that in Rise of Skywalker. So it was. There were some unexpected things, but it was a lot of expected things.
Yeah, I guess it was hard to do both, to pay tribute to the legacy of the Sith and the Jedi, and also say like, oh, this is about the Star Wars galaxy, and how they overcome the dark side and war, and actually come together. And it did come together at the end. I really enjoyed the Luke and Leia, seeing Luke where I did, and seeing all the Leia tributes, because I was a little concerned when watching the movies, like, are they going to pay any homage to her like expanded universe self, like that she trained as a Jedi, and we got to see a little bit of that in The Last Jedi, just a little bit, and then we see more of it in this one here, and I was really glad to see that.
Yeah, me too. I know some people were a little disappointed with, sounded like really disappointed or whatever. Maybe that's not even the right word, but in Last Jedi, with her using the Force to come back to the ship. Why?
I think it's just because it looked weird.
Yeah, like the way it was done, it like didn't explain it at all. It was just kind of like, Leia's out in space, but she's not dead. She's just flying back towards the spaceship.
I mean,
it was just kind of very much like.
To me, it was like, it was clear to me, like, it's because she's obviously Force sensitive, and she doesn't necessarily use the Force for fighting. She doesn't use it aggressively. She would use it in a life-threatening event.
Right.
Yeah, but just as someone who's a little bit less familiar with the series, I was very confused.
Yeah, but I mean, we all watched like the Empire, where she did have that little communication with Luke, which that was something small and that could be explained away by her just feeling him. But she also is a Skywalker.
Twin powers.
And if you look and if you look at the expanded novels and series, that she expands on that, and I'm glad that they brought that in. And I liked I guess, the story of Ben Solo. I felt that they wrapped it up pretty well.
Yeah, I did pretty much like him in this. I like how they ended his storyline for the most part. Like, the exact ending was a bit annoying, where it was back and forth and back and forth. It felt like, and like the Force healing thing. Like, I know it was a thing. I know it's been a thing in the extended universe, at least. You use it in like games and you see it and everything, but that was a weird thing for a lot of people. And I get that they were also trying to make it. My understanding is that they were trying to make it a thing that was pretty like, it was just kind of hers, or it's not like a general Force ability, because a lot of times now Force abilities are kind of specific to the people, to the users.
Yeah, that's something that they've been like trying to like, I guess, push with like the new Star Wars. Is like, certain people who are strong could have like a specific like trait within the Force, and you see that in some of the newer games and stuff. I mean, for me, I feel like Ben Solo's whole story is just completely tragic, and like I wish he would have gotten a happy ending. Like what I wish with the whole scene where he sees his dad and it's like a flashback, what I wish like would have happened there is like, Anakin comes back to him and starts talking to him about, like coming back to the light, and like saying like, I wasn't the one telling you like this as Darth Vader, like, you need to fulfill my destiny. And, even if he still didn't listen to that, he could have then brought in Han Solo, and that would have had like a complete meshing of, the three trilogies.
I think that would have been great.
Mhm.
I did enjoy, though. I did think it was good what they did with Han Solo, but
Yeah.
but
Because
yeah, you know,
he was very resistant
I
to
do
coming
wish
back.
they had there was some communication between Anakin and Ben, because it was like we've seen him as a Force ghost. We know he's around there. We've seen every other Force ghost pretty much except Kenobi, but
Mhm. And I mean,
Qui-Gon.
he's the chosen one. Like, what's he doing? Like, just watching, his
Yeah.
family like being destroyed and like his
Yeah.
like legacy. Like, I'm just curious, like, what was the reason for not having him in there?
I don't know.
Besides the that scene in the beginning where I guess where Sidious is talking to Ben and he's saying that he's been every voice in the corner of your mind.
Yeah.
Where he does that, where he goes into James Earl Jones, and then we do hear Anakin at the end speaking
Restore
to
the
Rey.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I'm like, why did he only talk to Ray? Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
you see your grandson
true.
following the same
Yeah.
path that you were, and yeah, he
Yeah.
might be closing himself off from the Force, but like, Star Wars is all about family. Like, you do your most to like, you care for him. That was Luke's whole thing with Vader, is like he loved his father so much, even though he was this horrible person, and it brought him back from the dark side. Like, return the favor.
Yeah. And then the Wild Wild West stuff with Sidious coming back and wanting Rey to kill him so he could possess her and have immortality, and so all the Sith could have immortality, and the whole dyad and the Force stuff. I was watching that and I'm like, cool, all right, cool, all right, cool, okay, that's cool.
I did like the scene where Sidious just like uses the Force and like gets their essence. So he's like, oh, how I can stay alive and do all this. I don't need to die. Well, never mind. You guys get on out of here.
Yeah. And just I do want to hope they kind of maybe clarify some things with, I don't know. There was a lot of unclarification, a lot of things left unsaid with
Unclear.
What's his name? Not Poe.
Finn.
Finn.
Yeah.
His relationship with Rey and the girl from The Last Jedi.
Rose.
Kelly
Rose.
Trans character, yeah.
Yeah. I never
Rose.
cared for her character in The Last Jedi. She was part of that whole part of the movie that I just didn't care for. So like I'm not part of that group that was really upset with how little she was used, because I was just like, I think she was used just the right amount for as much as I liked her character to begin with. I thought she was too much in The Last Jedi, but
I mean, I feel like it was a lot of just like backlash from certain aspects of the fans, and that's probably why her character development was just like cut. Like, but
yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have mind to see more of her. I mean, it's like,
like if they had done better with her than in The Last Jedi, I would have been fine with it.
Yeah,
But
you kind of expected her to be folded into the new group, the new team of like Rey, Finn, and Poe, but she was kind of left on the side there, and trying to see that other stuff about, was Finn talking about his feelings for Rey, or was he talking about that? Was he trying to tell her that he was Force sensitive?
He was trying to say that he was Force sensitive.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what they've said.
That's what they've been saying. I mean, it doesn't make much sense in terms of like the movies part. Like, hey, we're about to die, but I can use the Force, so let's see what happens here.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I think I'm Force sensitive. Why don't you do something then?
But I do wish they would have done something more with like Finn's character. Like the whole like Force Awakens like trailer, you think he's going to be the main character, like he's the one that the Force is awakening in, and it turns out to be Rey, which is completely fine. I just wish, it would have been cool to have like the full 3 cast being Force sensitive. Like that explains why Poe's such a good pilot. That's why Finn decides to lead the stormtroopers. That would have been cool.
Yeah,
I probably would have enjoyed it too much because of how that idea reminds me of Knights of the Old Republic 2. Where you can like get all of your crew to be Jedi, basically.
Yeah, and it's like the same idea. Like I feel the problem with like The Last Jedi is like it tries to really get into the idea of, you know, were the Jedi really great, which is completely fine because they weren't. Like, you
Mhm.
know, they even say it like, you know, the Jedi, even at their peak, they allowed Darth Sidious to take control of the Senate because they were so
Mhm.
like not
Yeah.
paying attention to what really mattered, and that's like why
Yeah.
Qui-Gon wasn't on the council and stuff. But like the idea of Quarter 2, which like, you know, you question like what's actually like good versus evil, is really cool. And I just think that
Mhm.
that's where it missed the mark. Like it was trying to do that story, but it didn't do it great.
Yeah. And that's why I tend to think a lot of the extended universe stuff is a better place for that, where you have more time to really explain that and delve into it. So overall, I thought Rise of Skywalker was good. Pretty much what I expected because of all of the inconsistencies with directors and everything, the lack of a plan. But it was a solid movie, not the worst Star Wars movie. Let's just say.
That's definitely Attack of the Clones right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
What do you guys think is the best order to view the movies in? I remember in college, there was a lot of discussion about it being 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, and then like the sequels in their order. I think all of that discussion was before even Rogue One came out. So I'm just curious to get your guys' opinions on now that it's all finished, the whole Skywalker thing. What do you think is the best order for viewing? Either, and do you think it should be different if you're going into it for the first time, or if you've already seen it and you're just returning to it and you want to do a binge of all of them?
I think if you're someone who's seen it before and is like more or less familiar with all the movies, I think it'd be cool to do it just like chronologically, and especially in terms of like put Solo and Rogue One where they're supposed to go in the timeline. I think it'd be a really interesting way of watching it, but probably only if you're already familiar with the series.
And to clarify, that would put Solo before Rogue One. Yeah, because Rogue One leads directly into 4.
I mean, for me, like when we watched it in college before the sequel trilogy came out, I like the idea of the flashback, the 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, but I didn't like showing it to someone who's never seen Star Wars before. It makes it really complicated to be like, hey, we're going back in time. Like,
it's just a really long flashback.
And I was thinking about that because I didn't do the whole thing, but I recently rewatched the prequel trilogy in order, and then I was thinking, you know, I remember the discussion of viewing it in that order, and just thinking of how long that is to do the prequels, and then, you know, in between 5 and 6, it's like that feels like a lot. I don't
like
know
when the
that's
flashback
the
itself is longer than like the movies you watched up until that point.
Right.
Like,
it's
Yeah.
We're gonna do this for 4 hours and then have a 6-hour flashback.
That's what I did for my pre-Rise of Skywalker marathon. New Hope, Empire, then 3 prequels, and then Solo, Rogue One, and then back to Return of the Jedi to watch, and then watch Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. Which, it was like, okay, so I'm kind of stuck in the prequels for 5 movies of prequels, prequels and anthology movies, and then back to the main story, and then moving to the future. So
and you know, I think that is just, I agree with Matthew. I think that's too complicated especially for somebody that's getting new into the series, that's just getting into the series.
Right.
I would definitely recommend, if it were me, I would probably recommend just doing it chronologically.
But then you don't get the Darth Vader twist. Like, if it's for someone who's never seen it and has never heard of the twist, I say release order.
Yeah. And I feel like the nice thing about the release order is if you're trying to get someone to enjoy the series, you might want to start with the best movies.
Yeah.
And I feel like starting someone off with 1 and 2 is likely for them to be like, nah, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago now.
Start with Rogue One.
And I think I made this point to some people. really, I think every trilogy is better in some aspects, in one aspect or another, or at least, than the other trilogies.
I mean,
So,
that's
like,
fair.
True.
I think the sequel trilogy uh, is the best acted. I think it has just overall the best acting.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the best graphics, but that's kind of
Yeah.
unfair just because it's
Yeah.
newest.
Yeah.
I think the original trilogy has the best story. I think just in order and everything, I think it tells the best story.
Yeah.
And it's
Young
the most
Harrison Ford.
consistent, even though it's a little weird.
I'm sorry, I'm such a girl.
Yeah.
Stop.
And I do think
The
I
prequels
do
have the best world building. Like,
yeah, and I was gonna say
Ew.
with the prequel trilogy, I think it has the best world building. Just because you really get the sense of the best sense that there's a universe outside of the main characters.
Right. The first trilogy was all about Jedi versus Sith and
Blowing
fate
up
of
the Death Star
galaxy.
twice.
Yeah, the fate of the galaxy rests on this small circle of individuals, and all their cannon fodder.
And the sequel trilogy
just the big
is
wars that they had.
and the sequel trilogy is just okay. Who was everybody's father and grandfather and mother?
Yeah. Really quick, is there is sequel trilogy and prequel trilogy like the official way of talking about it, or is there something
Yes.
else? Because I keep getting
there's-
confused.
well,
yeah,
like
yeah.
That's where I see. That's what I
that's
see.
how
all
we
the
see
time.
it.
No, I mean
There-
I do too, but I have to remember.
Because
there's
that's like on Reddit. There's like prequel memes, sequel memes,
Mhm.
and OT
Yeah.
memes.
the Lucasfilm story group calls it what I don't remember what the prequel trilogy is, but like the Galactic trilogy, like the original trilogy is like the Age of Rebellion. The newest one is the Age of
Age of-
Resistance.
Age of the Republic.
That's what it is. Yeah, Age
Yeah.
of. So that's what they've called it to refer to them.
That doesn't help me.
So
Yeah, I think it's too complicated for the general audiences.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
We don't
it's
want to just call
another
them
name for it.
Anakin, Luke, Ray.
Meh.
I mean, you could.
But
That makes
then
it
you
better.
see, and that's my big problem with the sequel trilogies overall, or the sequel trilogy overall. They're still clumping it in the Skywalker saga, yet Rey is the main character, and she's not. I don't care what she says at the end. She is not a Skywalker.
He's not.
She just said she was a Skywalker.
She's not a Skywalker.
She said that.
She's a liar.
She had the nod.
She's an
She got the
identity
nod from-
thief.
She got the nod from Luke and Leia while she was on the Skywalker ranch.
That was actually Palpatine just manipulating her again.
What?
It happens.
No.
I still wonder why Ben wasn't there.
No,
I
like it
question
should
that
have.
too.
It was really Ben's trilogy, in my opinion. Like,
Mm.
or I think it should have been, if it wasn't.
Should have been, but
Oh.
I did that on purpose.
Yeah.
well, I made it better.
Thanks,
A solo trilogy? Is that what you're saying?
Josh. Shut up. But yeah. So again, I think that. Well, those are my thoughts. I don't need to say any more about what I think.
I think it would be interesting to have someone brand new to the series, which might be hard to find, honestly, at least in the circles I float in. But I think it would be interesting to have someone watch them chronologically and start with one and move from there. Just I feel like as an interesting social experiment.
I did watch
see
a
how their perceptions are different.
I did see a small clip on Reddit where a dad was showing his two kids Star Wars for the first time, and
Oh, yeah, I
had
guess
them watch
children.
the A New Hope and then Empire, and they were actually shocked at the revelation that Darth Vader was his father. Yeah,
Yeah.
Which
And, I can see
it's pretty
that.
priceless.
I can see that working either way. I wouldn't know how to introduce it to somebody else. Again, I would kind of want to do it both ways, because then it's different it's a totally different way of experiencing the story if you do it in chronological order. I don't think it's necessarily worse, to not have that be such a surprise, but it's different, I imagine, because you see that you see what he's become and how he's been treating his children. and it's just, then it's a whole thing, and it's a revelation for Luke, not necessarily the viewer at that point.
Yeah.
Which would actually bring in an interesting element of like, oh my God, Luke's gonna freak out, and like living in that anticipation of like knowing what
Yeah.
Luke doesn't know would be
Yeah,
a really
again,
interesting thing to see.
Again, that's a different kind of storytelling,
Mhm.
It's I forget what it's
Not invalid, just
called,
different.
but,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
And then
still cool.
I just like having the three prequels, the prequel trilogy between Empire and Return, as like you're kind of uncovering all that history that that was only alluded to in the first two movies.
Yeah. So what? All right, we've talked about generally the Skywalker saga, and we've mentioned Rogue One and Solo a few times. Do you think they should count as part of the Skywalker saga?
I think they should, just because they refer to characters within those. I really don't like how they're coming out with the Skywalker saga, the set, and it's like $300 some for the 4K box set, but it doesn't have Rogue One or Solo in it.
Really quick, the
shade.
The Skywalker saga, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like all 9 movies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like
Officially.
for someone who like pretty much has only seen the movies, it's weird for like, oh, all of these 9 are together, but these 2 are like part of something else. It's like, what else is there? Like, there's nothing else.
Yeah.
And I know that there is, but just from being the perspective of someone who's only seen the movies, it's weird to like separate them, especially when they fit into the timeline.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, and I think I don't think they should be counted, because, well, obviously they don't really have to do with any Skywalkers.
I might agree with you, but I think my point is more that like, it's weird that they're like, we're gonna take 9 out of our 11 movies and be like, this is the saga, and then there's like no other saga, right? So
but again,
it's
that's also I think that's also part of just
like
I guess what
calling
you could
World War
consider
One
the
World War One before World War II happened.
I guess that's what you could consider
That makes sense.
the awkward transition period that's kind of going on now, where it's right now these are the 2 movies that are just like totally unrelated to anything, pretty much. They're out of the Skywalker saga.
Not super necessary.
Yeah.
Though.
But again, like it seems that they're, and as we have seen already with like The Mandalorian, even though it's a TV show, not a movie, but we're seeing that be expanded upon more. That there are other stories to tell in this, so that's why I think they should be separate, and there will just be more to accompany them later on the line.
Yeah, and I just feel like it's weird to like start making groups when you only have like, oh, this is the stuff that goes in this group, and then this is the other stuff.
Yeah,
It's like,
it is a bit weird.
Let's make 2 groups, and then we can start sorting stuff. But that's not what they're doing.
And they're going to. I mean, I know we're going to talk about it later, but they're leading into that.
But it's like, did they call the MCU Phase 1 when Phase 1 was still happening? Did they?
Yes. Beyond, the movies, talking about how there's the Skywalker saga and then like the anthology. They were going to call it like the anthology trilogy, but then they ended up scrapping, I think, the Obi-Wan Kenobi one. Or no, it was the Boba Fett one they scrapped.
Yeah, Boba Fett.
Boba Fett. And then, so there's that, but for a lot longer than that sort of extended universe, there has been the books that have made up the bulk of the Star Wars EU. And I know Hannah is not really familiar with that at all. Josh, are you familiar with any of that?
I recall in my younger days reading some of the expanded universe, which is now Legacy, according to Disney. But I do remember reading about Caden and Jason Solo.
Jace. Was it Jason? I think it was
Jason,
Jace.
Caden.
Jason and Jaina.
It's been a long time.
Oh, okay.
But I remember reading a lot about their back and forth being twins and one going to the dark side. And
were those Luke's kids?
They were solos.
Yeah, that was a weird thing to me because I do remember reading about those, like their children and everything, and then coming into the sequel trilogy, it being totally different. I was a little like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were some other things where they paid homage to the some more of the trilogy where Darth Vader, or sorry, Anakin, excuse me, came back as a Force ghost and tried to, I guess, make amends with Leia. Some other things, and we're seeing that how Obi-Wan, finally, like, I guess, gave up the ghost, as in he released himself into the Force. He gave himself over to the Force entirely, so he wasn't a Force ghost anymore.
Yeah,
just little things like that.
Well, and I one thing I read about a lot of the books more than I read the books, but I do remember reading about the whole thing with Palpatine coming back and like possessing. I think he possessed like Luke for a while. And
yeah, there was
really
something about that, and like, well, there's like a couple different things. Like there's like Palpatine clones, Luke turning to the dark side, becoming like, I think it was Palpatine's student or something like that, just so he can destroy him. And then there was another thing where like Palpatine was trying to like get into like, I guess, Leia's womb because she was pregnant with one of the children. And it was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think
all right.
I remember thinking when the sequels were coming out that they did, it felt like they kind of moved some of that in. Like, obviously that stuff seemed to be a bit too weird for them, but you can kind of see maybe some of those ideas crushed over, like especially probably more in Rise of Skywalker than anywhere else, but especially how like Palpatine had his influence over Kylo Ren, and how he essentially came back from the dead. He had the clones, as we saw, that were Snoke, all that. And so I think they did bring some of those ideas loosely over. And I know there were a lot of books. Matthew, you said earlier that you're reading or rereading the original Thrawn trilogy.
Yeah, so basically before the prequels and before the sequels, like basically before like anything past 99, Timothy Zahn created this trilogy called the Throne series, and that at the time was considered the true like sequel trilogy, and it like goes after, it's about like 5 years after Return of the Jedi, so like in current timeline it'd be like during the Mandalorian's timeline. So it's cool story. I haven't really finished it, but I do know what happens. I just wanted to read it for myself to see what I did like and what I didn't like. And there are some parts in the first book where you really get to like, you're like reading what Luke's thoughts are and like how he's like unsure of himself about training the next generation of Jedi, because at the time in the book Leia's pregnant with the twins, and that kind of leads into like one of the plot points of the bad guys want the kids, of course, to raise little evil Jedi.
And that was Luke and Leia's kids, right? They got real into the incest afterwards.
No.
I mean, they started off with it in the movies. I figured they just
well,
George
they wanted to keep
Lucas
they wanted to keep the bloodline pure. That's what it was.
This isn't Harry Potter. Calm down.
It's Disney. Wait, Disney doesn't own. Never mind.
No, they don't.
Not yet.
I was gonna say not yet. Not yet. Give it time. But no, have you? I know they redid the or I can't remember if I think they've wrapped up the new Thrawn trilogy, right? Because they've
finished the third book. I know they're making more of them, and I think the fourth book, I think it's like its own set of it's its own trilogy, will come out in November.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I remember seeing about those, and I've been interested in reading the Thrawn trilogy. I never got around to it. I'm really bad when it comes to books. And I knew that this new trilogy was actually tied into the lore. It's now canon with Disney. So I'm thinking about picking them up at some point. I don't know when that will be, if I actually ever get around to it. But yeah, and he's a Chiss, right?
Yeah,
Ron?
he's still Chiss. I think it goes more into like the backstory of what's going on, especially in the second book. There's like a cool little, well, it's like part of the book where it's like part of it is in the present and then part of it is in the past, like during the Clone Wars. And Thrawn actually meets Anakin Skywalker, and now he's like working with Darth Vader. And the thought of the book is like, does Thrawn know that Anakin is
That's
Darth
the same
Vader?
person. It's interesting. Yeah, I may need to get into that. So yeah, do we think any of these are worth reading now? Like, I'm sure the legacy books are still, I'm sure they're still fun, but would you recommend them to somebody that's,
I mean, if they want to get
They
into Star Wars and they
want
don't
to-
really care where like the source material, like if it doesn't line up, like with like Marvel and stuff like that, they always reboot stuff. Like there's always 1,000 different origin stories. Like if you don't care about that stuff, then sure. I mean, it's
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's what you enjoy. That's what Star Wars is all about. So it's like, you know, just because it's a different timeline doesn't mean you have to just throw it out the window, because they're constantly taking stuff back from Legends and putting it into the canon universe.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Well, and the comics are canon, right?
Yeah, they're
All of them, or most?
for the most
Yeah.
part, all of them are. The one thing I don't like, I'm not a comic book reader. I've always been like a visual person, and like it just like a visual book just doesn't work for me. So I've never been a big fan of comics. But the Star Wars comics the past couple of years have been insane in terms of content, like especially like the rebooted Star Wars issue that just came out maybe a couple days ago. It's getting into like what happens after Empire Strikes Back, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it is now, but I remember hearing about something recent. I don't remember if it was that recent, but something recent about they went more in depth on a really important part. Again, I don't remember exactly, which makes this a really terrible story to tell. But yeah, I like that. I'm not always a big fan for storytelling in, I guess, that's specific to a more niche audience, because then a lot of times it splits the fan base, and the casual fan won't be able to really get into it as much, or they're just not going to. Yeah.
I like how they're filling in the gaps. I think that's what they're kind of relying on a lot of comics to do, since they can't really pump out as much, animation or live action stuff to show, oh, this is what was going on between this and this. This explains why this character is doing this, or give you some more context to how things got to here, like bridging the gaps between movies. And I do like seeing comics take up that role, especially with I've seen a lot of screenshots of a comic that shows Darth Vader's side of the story that you don't see in New Hope, like him going down to Tatooine, him remembering his old life. I think that one ends with
I was thinking that's
him,
like the first one or something.
Yeah, I think that's one that ends with him hiring Boba Fett to like figure out who that pilot was, or figure out more of what's going on with the Resistance, and then him learning who the pilot is, and that sets in motion things for Empire.
Yeah, I mean, that comic was really good.
Yeah.
I also think the one where he has to obtain his own lightsaber and corrupt it is a cool one. It kind of gives you a little bit more information about how these new Sith operate, of like, why their lightsabers are red, and like what's the process towards that. And it's a really cool moment where you get to like see inside the mind of Darth Vader and like see his internal conflict, because I mean his complete story is just tragic, and you get to see more of the inner workings of Darth Vader versus Anakin, and having Anakin trying to pop out and Vader being like, get back down there, buddy. This is my time.
I think if comics are done well, they can actually, like, in general, help the fan base, because you have people who just want to continue being casual, but then you have people who want to really get into it. And I feel like as long as it is sort of that filler stuff, then you can still have those two distinct groups and they're happy. I feel like what would really upset the balance would be if you have something happen in a movie that like requires you to know what happened in a comic. That's where you're like, okay, this is not going in a good direction.
Like, let's go talk about Knights of the Old Republic and just the Old Republic setting in general. Who here has played Knights of the Old Republic?
Oh,
Matthew, me, Josh,
No, I missed
Anna.
out.
Big fan of Lego Star Wars.
Yeah. So the Knights of the Old Republic, and just again, 1, 2, and then those are more closely grouped together than the Old Republic. I mean, it's obviously still in the same general era, but the Old Republic, I think, takes place, 300 years after the second?
Yeah, like it's loosely connected just to be able to tell more story, but I mean, it's all within the same time zone, I guess you could say, with Star Wars.
And they do have Revan still in the Old Republic. He is old. So I have a question of what is the significance of the Old Republic era and just like the series, all of that?
I mean, in terms of like comparing it to the movies, the games are definitely very story driven. And it really does feel like you're placed into a Star Wars movie and you're like controlling the outcomes. But I mean, besides that, I mean, it's just a good game. Like if you have time and you're like not frustrated with the old like gaming system for it, like PC, whatever.
It's tough. It's rough.
Yeah, it's not great, but the story definitely holds its own, especially 17 years ago. Like I'd still play it now.
Yeah.
I imagine it falls in the same category as a TV show where being able to have a slower pace lets you feel stuff out more.
Yeah, definitely. And, I really enjoy it for a number of reasons. You do get to learn more about just the world, like you learn more about a lot of the races. So, you may see a lot of these different alien races in the movies and not have any idea of what they are. You really get to learn a little more about them and their cultures in the games. And also just like some of the, like, not necessarily origins of the Jedi and Sith, but definitely some of the older traditions.
Figures,
yeah, like where they go to collect their crystals, how they build their lightsabers. Usually, from what I remember, I don't remember if I've missed something, but how it usually goes is that the Jedi, as part of their training, have to go and build their own lightsaber. So they like find their crystals, do a whole meditation thing, and they actually construct their own lightsaber to finish their training. Yeah. And whereas with the Sith, it's also pretty reflective of them and their culture, is they usually get their lightsabers by killing a master or somebody else that already has a lightsaber, and they take theirs. Or it's passed down to them by their master.
One thing that I do think is cool from the games is like, it's in the second game, there's like, it's after, the main events of the first game, is you talk to one of the settlers on one of the planets where an old Jedi temple used to be, and they basically consider the Jedi and the Sith to be the same thing. It's, it's cool to see, like, we know what the Jedi and the Sith are, one's good, one's bad, but to like people in the galaxy, it's all the same stuff. They both have their own issues, and they are like, the Jedi are considered peacekeepers, but sometimes they just don't act. And that's like one of the main issues from the first game is how, Revan and Malak turn to the dark side and become the enemies of the game.
Yeah. And again, there is also what I love about the Old Republic setting is you do get a lot more of the lines get a little more blurred, more blurred. So it's like, the Jedi they're not necessarily so much seen as the good guys. Like they're shady. They do some shady stuff. And they're doing really what's in their best interest, mostly. And the Jedi, I mean, the Sith, they're not really any better. They're after power. They're a little more self-centered. the biggest difference that I can say is the Sith care more about personal power, individual power, and the Jedi care more about power amongst themselves. Like they want to share the power and the control. They may say it's like to keep others safe and everything, but they're still the ones that feel they need to be in control and have a lot of that power. And that definitely also comes in the Old Republic. It kind of has to, just from a gameplay perspective. That it's you can play as either side, and you have this whole world built around them. And it's a BioWare game, so you make your choices, and you can even be like a Sith, like a Sith Lord, but be good and choose not to kill a lot of people unnecessarily. And you can basically be a light side Sith or a dark side Jedi.
Or a gray Jedi.
You can't really be a gray Jedi, unfortunately.
Yeah, the game makes it hard to do that.
No.
Yeah, but I mean, you still kind of have that option. Like it's just you're not going to get all the good stuff. Like it's going to seem a little bit weird if you try to. You're not going to get all the good perks from being one or the other. Anyways, now, and the last note for games, since I am starting to get carried away. Jedi Fallen Order was also a game that released late last year, and I've played it all the way through twice. Matthew, I assume you've played it. Well, actually, yeah, because we have Game Share, and we do that, and that's how I played it on Xbox. So have you beaten it?
Yeah, it's good story. Ending is definitely kind of like a whoa. It's a good story. You get to see what happens to someone rediscovering the Force after kind of closing themselves off to it. And then from a gameplay perspective, it makes sense. I'm just interested to see what they do with the sequel because, what's coming. So we'll just see what happens there.
And, I was really happy that, as we had mentioned earlier, there's like the Force exists in a lot of different ways, and, different cultures use it differently. You do see, I'm blanking on her name right now. I think it starts with an M, though, although I could be confusing her with the character from KOTOR 2.
I can't remember her name, but she's a Night Sister.
And they use magic, which it's like it's the Force, but it's not the Force. So
it's like it's like a weird version of the Force. Like they have to it's kind of like how the Sith have in the TV show they have dark side rituals and stuff like that. It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
kind of like I think Darth Maul's culture had something like that.
Yeah,
is that
because
is that correct?
Because they're on Dathomir, and that's where I don't know if that's where he's from. I know he goes there. I don't remember if that's where the Zabraks or if that's the Zabrak homeworld or anything, but
I believe he was born there because his mom is the Night Sisters leader. Right. So Mother Taliesin was his mom. So yeah, I'm pretty sure he was born there.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring it up earlier, but I kind of forgot. Speaking of Darth Maul, we also did in The Mandalorian at the very end get to see the Darksaber come in, and I'm really excited to see just what they do with that in the Mandalorian.
That was cool. I had no idea what it was doing there. I was completely lost.
Yeah, and in the games, especially Knights of the Old Republic 2 and the Old Republic MMO, it is nice seeing a lot of the history of the Mandalorians and Mandalore and all that, their whole legacy with just their history with the Jedi and everything as well, and seeing an expansion on their culture. And I like that they kept most of that, if not all of it, in the show, The Mandalorian. So that was cool. So kind of wrapping up, what do you guys think is next for Star Wars, or what do we know is next for Star Wars?
Well, I'm hoping some other saga. so that it's not just the Star Wars saga, because I said before that doesn't make sense.
It's always going to be the Star Wars saga.
No,
it's
but
not always going to be
not
the
just that.
The Skywalker saga.
What I say?
The
Oh my
Star
goodness.
Wars saga.
saga.
Because it's always Star Wars.
Skywalker.
It's always going to be the Star Wars.
Listen to what I mean and not what I say.
No.
But regardless, just having like one saga still doesn't make sense. So they need another one.
They have been discussing doing an Old Republic era series. I think Ryan Johnson was going to be doing that one, although I can't keep the directors straight for who was like given what project. They've kind of announced this, but
yeah,
he's got a trilogy in the works. But I know the next official thing that I guess they're working on is called Project Luminous, and I'm pretty sure that's the High Republic era. So it's like 400 years before the movie, so not straight up like 4,000 years before the movies like the Old Republic was, but maybe we'll see a younger Yoda in there.
Yeah, it's going to be Yoda's teen years, angsty teen years.
Oh gosh.
And other than the fact that just having one saga doesn't make sense, I do think it'd be really cool because like I'm learning a lot today about what else is out there in terms of Star Wars, and so I think it'd be really interesting to have like a seemingly disconnected story that takes place in the same universe. I think it would be a really good way to expand it for the masses.
Yeah, it's time to have something similar but different. We don't have to focus on this super important group.
Well, and
we can move on to other areas of the galaxy. And
I know Hunter's probably going to disagree with me, but I think it'd be really cool. I know. I think it'd be really cool to see more stuff like Rogue One. More stuff that is not based so much around the Jedi and the Sith, but more around these sort of little people.
I prefer things not centered
really
around.
Cool.
I really do enjoy things not strictly centered around the Jedi and the Force. That's why I was excited for Rogue One, but they still managed to add it in there as a primary part of everything, even though they said they weren't going to do it. And
I mean, there's just
that's my biggest problem with Rogue One. Like they still have the guy who's like Force sensitive. He's a Jedi pretty much, but without an actual lightsaber, he uses a stick. I'm not.
But I do think it'd be really interesting to see all the different things that are going on that for those of us who have really only seen the movies don't really know is even a thing.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more. They announced that Project Luminous, so you said, Matthew? Would be in the next 2-3 years coming out. They have another trilogy as announced. But
there'll be more info on it coming out sometime this month.
I just hope they take their time.
Take their time, yes.
I can never remember never remember when Star Wars Celebration is.
It's typically in April.
Or is it May the 4th?
May the 4th.
I feel like it's not. I feel like I always want it to be, but it's not.
It should be.
So I'm sure we're going to find out a lot more then. Otherwise, I'm also hoping to see more about... I'm always hoping for more games in the Star Wars universe just because there are so few really great ones that they stick with. Unfortunately, we didn't talk about Battlefront, which... I'm disappointed, but
more Force Unleashed. But
again, we're trying to keep it shorter when we've already gone for a while. Yeah, Hannah, you got like 30 minutes. That's plenty. If you're listening, or watching, just talk to us, please. I like talking. But I don't know about everyone else. Just talk to us. What you think is going to be next? What you're looking forward to that has already been announced. How you hope they deal with things, and just everything Star Wars. If you just want to say, I love Star Wars, then I'm fine.
We do too.
Or send us your new trilogy fan fiction.
Yeah, and send everybody else a really well thought out, really well written article as to why Rogue One is awful. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Don't listen to him.
Quickly, Hannah, do you have the topic for next week?
Yeah, I think next week we're going to talk about which is better, sequels or remakes. It is a complicated question.
Okay.
Is it that? We'll talk about it.
Seek makes. See makes.
See you guys next week.
Thanks, Matthew.
No problem. Thanks, guys.